Same-sex marriage would have been unthinkable 50 years ago, perhaps even 30 years ago. But in the last 20 years, in the last decade, it's almost become a form of bigotry to oppose it in many people's eyes. So there's been a fundamental shift in the way, not that we've thought even just about homosexuality, but marriage in general. And many historians look at the shift in the 1960s and 70s from the idea of marriage being a institution created around the rights and duties and needs of a family unit, including a husband and wife and children, to in the 1970s being the protection of a special romantic relationship between two people. And this reflects a larger shift in Western philosophical thought about the idea of rights and what they are. And I spend some time in my paper describing how a Protestant view in the early modern world had an understanding that rights were paired with responsibilities and duties, so that I had a right to religious freedom because I first had a duty to worship God. And that duty was the most important and primary duty in my life. Therefore, the community had a duty to respect that right of my worship. And other kinds of rights existed in the same way, so that the right to marry arose in good part of the procreative act, would produce children who now have a right to be taken care of by the mother and the father, who have a duty to those children, and therefore the state has a duty to respect that procreative unit and that family unit. We moved away from this notion of transcendent rights and duties and responsibilities towards a more human-centered, autonomous view of the individual as seeking its self-realization. And so now rights become whatever I think that I would most strongly like to identify myself as and promote in my life. And in the realm of sexuality, it's maximum pleasure and maximum happiness, and that may involve the woman that I'm with now, but if she ceases to meet that, then I'm free to choose someone else. And the relationship with children or others is secondary. Well, out of this changed notion of marriage then allows new definitions of marriage entirely. And if two men or two women, or extended beyond that to polygamy or other kinds of arrangements, if that's what I really want and it brings me the greatest self-actualization, then I should be allowed to do it. And not only should I be allowed to do it, I have a right to do it. And since it's a right, you have an obligation as a citizen in a community to support that and approve of it. When we speak about freedoms and liberties versus rights, we see the difference between those things that God allows us to do, even though they may be wrong morally. God gives us freedom and room in our lives to pursue things that are morally wrong. And so does the state, because it can't regulate all areas of our lives. But there's a difference between saying someone should be allowed to make a wrong moral choice. There's a difference between that and saying, and they have a right to expect and anticipate and require you or the state to support, endorse, promote, and facilitate that choice, right? So I would say that there is a freedom to certain sexual choices between consenting adults, and that freedom extends to having sex with those that you're not married to, and perhaps having sex with those of the same sex. The Bible and many people consider that an immoral choice, but it is a choice that we extend freedom to, and I think it's right that we don't criminalize that. God gives us freedom to make immoral choices. The state should do the same. But I would argue that marriage is in a different category. The notion of marriage is that this is a positive good that the community and its citizens are meant to uphold, protect, and endorse. And that moves beyond being a freedom to now being a right that I can compel your support and endorsement, or otherwise, if you don't do it, I can penalize you in some way. So where same-sex marriage is embraced as a legal matter, then it becomes required to teach it in all the public schools as a positive moral good, and criticism of it is not allowed. And in private schools, sometimes freedom is allowed for contrary views, but it becomes difficult for that teaching to continue even in private religious schools. So that's the difference between freedom to allow, which I'm all in favor of, but the right, there is no right, as some have said, to a moral wrong. And it's not that people aren't allowed to choose a moral wrong, it's that they don't have a requirement to force me to support, promote, endorse it. The difficulty facing us now is same-sex marriage is a legal reality that is unlikely to be reversed in the foreseeable future. So the arguments that I've just made about the difference between rights and freedoms are somewhat moot, because we have same-sex marriage now in our society. And as a doctrinal matter, the church doesn't recognize same-sex marriages. We're not going to perform them in our services. Both the seminary and the North American Division have made it clear that while all people are invited to attend our churches, that membership roles and leadership roles are limited to those who choose to live according to the biblical standard and lifestyle. I do think there are some remaining public policy questions that should concern the church. For me, the greatest problem, if you will, with same-sex marriage is now the perception that these are appropriate child rearing and child care units. And you don't have to be a Bible-believing Christian to question that. The Bible says, the fifth commandment, honor your father and your mother. And when we take children away from a context where they have a male and a female figure, how do they carry that out? And their development is often dependent on influences of both maternal and paternal. A male and a female figure become important. And I think that as a church, we can play a special role in helping our communities understand the importance of a balanced environment of male and female influences on children. And this extends beyond same-sex marriage to our singles, to single parents, where we can come alongside and help involve children, help bring those missing influences to bear that are important for their lives. And studies are beginning to show and to bear out that children really do need the love of a mother and a father for a full integrated development and upbringing.